A source said. A source said. There's a phrase you often hear or read in news reports, but what does it mean? Here's investigative journalist and freedom of information campaigner Heather Brooke with her view on anonymity.
When I came, I'd been a journalist in America, I came to Britain, the first thing I saw was that so much of the stories you read in a newspaper have no attribution at all. It'll be a spokesman for this government department, an official for the police, but nowhere would it have a name. Most people don't notice this at first and they think, well, who cares? Who needs to know the names of these people? There's only really one reason why they would be anonymous, and that is to avoid accountability for what they say. If they were confident about what they're saying, they would put their name behind it. End of story. I was trained, as all American journalists are, that you always name your source. It's a really key point. Now in Britain, the way information disclosure has evolved is that it's a patronage system. It's who you know. And if you know the right people, they'll do you a favour, they'll give you a few little bits of info. If you do name them, there will be some bad feeling held. If you were a parliamentary lobby correspondent, for example, you'd quickly find that people would stop speaking to you. The danger is that because they know their name is not going to be linked with that statement, there's a temptation to bend the truth, to misrepresent the truth, sometimes to just outright lie. Probably the best known example is John Charles de Menezes, the Brazilian electrician who was shot to death in Stockwell Tube. The first thing that happened was some anonymous police spokesman realised it was a mistake. But what they did was they started to run a lot of erroneous information. They were sort of casting this aura of suspicion around him, saying that he was wearing this big puffy jacket, that he'd vaulted the barriers. They also said that the police had identified themselves and they told him to stop, and he'd ignored them and he'd run through and got on this tube carriage.
They followed him into the station, told him to stop, and when he ran inside a tube carriage, they opened fire.
When they finally had the public inquiry and all these statements were looked into, all those statements were totally false. They were, in fact, lies.
Today's report into whether the police lied about the shooting found that Scotland Yard did mislead the public.
Because we never knew by name who had issued these statements, there was nobody that we as the public could go back to and say, who do we call to account? Forest Gate, another example. Again, it was a botched operation that took up, an entire street with dozens of police officers. They arrested these two men. One of them got shot in the scuffle. Then the smearing started to come into the public domain. There was accusations about how they'd been involved in terrorist activity. One of the brothers of the suspects who'd been out at a protest pictured next to a man wearing a sort of mock suicide belt. And obviously the implication is these are the kind of people we're dealing with. Out of nowhere came this really bizarre accusation that one of the brothers had accessed child pornography.
A computer seized then was examined and allegedly contained photographs of child abuse downloaded from the internet.
Which she totally denied, and there was never any evidence to prove this, and that charge fell away. So then you have to wonder, why did all these charges build up? Anonymous sourcing allows that kind of smearing to happen. The line that they will put out is that we're providing public information, but they're not. That is a total crock. What they are providing is information control, which is completely the opposite of information sharing. As soon as these official spokespeople are named, they're individually accountable, and very often they have to resign. I mean, people think the British press are these, jackals, but the way they just roll over and accept it as if it's fact, as if it's like the word of God has come down and said, this is the way it is. But it isn't a fact, it's what somebody in authority has said. And that's what the public need to know. This is what somebody in authority, preferably named, has told us.
Well, something to think about there.